If you're trawling the internet trying to find out what's the difference between one brand of robotic mower and another, and you've got a large garden, you might want to watch this video. Hi, I'm John Hall from Mower Magic in the UK. Today I'm going to be showing you two robots from different brands, both with the same lawn area cutting capability and similar price tags. I'm going to be highlighting a lot of the engineering on these two products, so it's less about the features and software, which is already well documented online. I'm going to be talking about the physical size, the user interface, the blades, the wheels and suspension, talking about collision sensors, the drive wheels, motors, and we're even going to be looking closely at the motherboard PCBs. We're going to compare the batteries, the chargers and the cabling. So if you're not interested in the nerdy details of what's inside these robots and how they're made, you might want to skip this video. It's also worth mentioning that most of the comparisons made in this video are also applicable to three model variants from each brand. On the Husqvarna, the 310 is built on the same platform as the 315 and the 315X. Essentially, all three models share the same electronics, motors, blades. Some additional specification, area coverage is the only real difference. The same goes for the L20 Elite. This robot has two siblings, the L20 Deluxe and L20 Elite S+. They're variation of the same platform with different specifications and price tags. With both robot variants rated for lawns of up to 1,000 square meters, this is a good comparison to see how the two robots are built and what you actually get for your money. Here we are focusing on the Husqvarna 310 and the Ambrogio L20 Elite model variations. The Husqvarna 310 is rated for lawn sizes up to 1,000 square meters and it has basic Bluetooth app connectivity built in. It sells for around £1,300. The Ambrogio L20 Elite also suitable for lawns up to 1,000 square meters, and despite its super small size, it can actually complete the job much faster than the 310. It also uses the more modern Bluetooth 4 protocol for connectivity with the mobile app and sells for around £1,100. The Ambrogio L20 Elite also features GPS assisted navigation and is fitted with a GSM Connect module for alerts, security tracking and mobile app connectivity. Okay, now let's compare the physical size of the two robots. The Husqvarna 310 is 50 centimeters wide by 62 centimeters long. The Ambrogio L20 is 29 centimeters wide by 42 centimeters long. So you can see this is a much more compact robot. So when it's sat in your garden, it's physically going to take up a lot less room. If we turn the two robots round, so you can see underneath, you'll notice there's a lot of empty space around the Husqvarna. It's got a large oversized shell and there's quite a distance between the tip of the blade and the outer shell of the robot. On the Ambrogio, everything is much more compact. You can see the distance between the wheels and the blade is much smaller. For lifting and carrying, the Husqvarna has a handle located underneath the rear bumper here, so you can pick it up and carry it. And on the Ambrogio, there are actually two grab handles either side of the chassis here, so you can pick it up and carry it quite easily like that. User interface. Let's look at the control panels on these two robots. We'll start with the Husqvarna 310. This robot features a 19-button keypad and monochrome LCD display. This is fairly standard on most of the Husqvarna robots in the range. All of the settings and options can be changed here. They can also be configured and changed using the Husqvarna mobile app, which is available for Android and ISO. And to be honest, it's much more intuitive to use, and you'll probably find it easier to do all of your settings via the phone rather than bending down trying to see that monochrome screen in your garden. On the Ambrogio L20, this features a simplified set of controls. Instead of the large colour touchscreen display you'll see on most of the other Ambrogio robot models, Here we have just 5 buttons. We've got an emergency stop button, an automatic mode button, stop and start, on and off, and go home. And there's a couple of LED indicators and a battery status icon. Here you have a rain sensor as well. Now, don't let this minimalistic keypad fool you. This robot is extremely powerful and sophisticated, and there's a myriad of settings still available to you via the smartphone app for iOS and Android. This can be connected via Bluetooth for the more advanced settings, or you can connect to it using the built-in GSM module for the day-to-day operations like go to mow, go home, keep out of an area, or just keeping track of it using the built-in tracker on a map. Blades. Let's have a closer look at the cutting systems on these two robots. We'll start with the Husqvarna 310. Now this robot has a 22cm width of cut. The blade itself is made up of 3 individual swing type razor blades which are attached to a plastic disc behind this aluminium slip disc. The blades themselves have a 2cm sharpened cutting edge, of which about 6mm can come into contact with grass. About 6mm of it actually protrudes past this aluminium slip disc. It's worth mentioning that in the instruction manual, Husqvarna recommend that these blades are replaced every 3 to 4 weeks, and they supply you with some spare screws and a pack of replacement blades. So the owner of the robot will need to replace these blades quite frequently. The other thing worth noticing is there's quite a distance between the outside shell of the robot and the tip of the cutting blade. So if your robot is installed to cut down the side of a fence line or a hedge or a wall, then the minimum amount of uncut grass that this robot will leave is 15 centimetres. It's quite a big distance, so you'll need to trim that area of uncut grass. We're going to remove this disc now and have a closer look of how it's made. The blades themselves can be removed by lining the screw head up through this hole and removing them with a Phillips screwdriver. I'm going to remove this slip disc so you can see a bit more of what the blades look like when they're attached to the disc. Here you can see this is the actual cutting disc. It's made of ABS plastic and it has brass threaded inserts moulded into the disc here, so the blades themselves attach with these Phillips screws into these inserts, so you can see a bit clearer how it works. Now we can move the disc itself. First remove the slip plate bearing, and then it's held on by 3 This is the actual cutting disc that the blades are attached to. Let's have a look at the blade on the L20. This robot has an 18cm cutting width. The blade is made up of 4 individual stainless steel fixed cutters with a 2cm sharpened edge, 1cm of which is at a 45-degree angle to aid mulching. The entire disc is made of 1mm sheet stainless steel. Let's remove this disc and look at it more closely in comparison to the 310 blade. Now we have both blades removed from the robots, we can have a closer look at their design. As you can see, they're quite different in the way they're made. The Husqvarna 310 has an ABS plastic disc with 3 individual cutters attached using Phillips screws into brass inserts. While the Ambrogio is a single sheet stainless steel design with 4 cutters around the outside. The cutters are slightly different as well, because 1cm of the cutting edge is profiled at 45-degree angle and the other is horizontal. This apparently helps with the mulching action to really blend that grass up fine. The other thing that's noticeable is, I would say, the Ambrogio blade, despite it being 18 centimetres against 22 centimetres, feels about 50% heavier because it's all stainless steel rather than stainless steel blades mounted to plastic. So it does feel very substantial. The manufacturer, Husqvarna, recommends these blades are replaced every 3 to 4 weeks. Ambrogio recommend this is changed annually, so you should get a full season out of one of these cutting blades. There's also an accessory star blade available for this robot as an optional extra for coping with long grass. Drive wheels. Having good grip on the surface of your lawn is absolutely essential for the success of any robotic lawnmower. So let's have a look at the design on these two different robots and see how they compare. We'll start with the Husqvarna. The drive wheels on the Husqvarna are 32mm wide by 20 centimeters in diameter. They're made of a hard ABS plastic, and they've got hard plastic treads with no flex in them. These little rectangular treads are solid and don't flex. If we have a look at the tyres on the Ambrogio, they're a completely different design. And in fact, half the width of the machine is taken up by the width of the tyres. These are an 85mm wide tyre by 13.5 centimetre in diameter, and they're made of a soft, flexible rubber tyre onto a plastic wheel. And these tyre treads really bite into the ground, so whether it's been raining or you've got morning dew, these tyres should have fantastic grip, passing over pathways, into connecting gardens. There shouldn't be any loss of traction at all with these wheels. Let's remove them now and have a closer look. Right, I've removed one of the drive wheels from each of these robots so we can take a closer look. We'll start with the Ambrogio L20. This wheel is a two-piece design, has a dust cover for the fixing, and then the tyre is actually moulded to this ABS hub. It's 5mm thick ABS around the outside of the rim there, and the tyre itself is made of this flexible EPMD rubber, which is foam filled. It has an enormous amount of traction. As the weight of the robot is applied to the ground and it starts to turn, you can see these flexible lugs, tyre treads, bite into the ground. So even on a smooth surface like this stainless steel table, you've got an enormous amount of traction. You can really, you can't get it to slip at all. So if you imagine that's driving over a concrete pathway or block paving to get from one lawn to another, that's going to have some serious grip and you're very unlikely to get any wheel spin. Same goes on wet or damp grass. That really is going to bite into the ground well. Have a look at the Husqvarna now. This is a 4-piece construction. We've got the fixing cover there. Then we've got a decorative hubcap. Then there's the wheel itself, and at the back of it there's a clip-on dust cover to keep the muck and grass out of it. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the tyre treads on this are actually made of hard plastic. So when the robot drives on the ground, there's no biting in. These treads just skip around. So on a shiny surface like this, they've got absolutely no purchase at all. So you imagine if that was on wet ground or on a wet surface, then it would be a similar lack of traction there. The other thing that's worth noticing is the combined width of the two drive wheels on the Ambrogio take up more than half the width of the actual robot. So you've got a huge amount of contact with the ground, ensuring that it's got good grip. If we do the same comparison with the two Husqvarna wheels together, you can see it only accounts for a fraction of the overall width of the robot. Onto the front wheels now. I've lifted the Ambrogio up so the front wheels are roughly the same height as the Husqvarna, so you can see them side by side. You'll notice that both manufacturers feature two caster style front wheels on the robots. The diameter of the tyre tread on the Husqvarna is 32mm, the same as the rear, and on the Ambrogio it's 30mm. The diameter of the wheel on the front of the Ambrogio is 80mm, and it's 100mm on the Husqvarna. Now both manufacturers use stainless steel bar for the axles. It's an 8mm thickness on the Ambrogio and a 6mm thickness on the Husqvarna. Following on from talking about the drive wheels, I want to talk about suspension, or the way in which the four wheels are arranged on these two robots. To make it easier to understand, I'm going to remove the bumper cover on the Husqvarna so you can see the front wheels and the rear wheels together, as they're already exposed on the Ambrogio. So the top bumper cover pops off, and I've already unplugged some electrical connections at the front. So both robots use a four-wheel configuration. However, all of the Husqvarna robots have completely fixed and rigid chassis, whereas most of the Ambrogio robots use some sort of suspension. So when an undulation in the lawn forces one of the wheels up slightly, the traction isn't lost from the drive wheels. I'll show you an example of this. This is a 5mm window packer, and if I put that under the front wheel there to represent this robot passing over a very small undulation, you can see suddenly the whole machine rocks and this wheel can be rotated freely. The wheel at the other side is completely off the ground. So if I can show you there, this wheel is completely left spinning. So the drive is completely taken away from the rear wheel. If we do the same thing on the Ambrogio, you can see that there's a twisting mechanism that allows the robot to ride over undulations in the ground. So if I put a 5mm packer under there, you can see there's absolutely no loss of contact on any of the wheels. In fact, the travel has 25mm of movement in it. So this is a 25mm wedge, and you can see all of the wheels remain firmly on the ground. If I bring that round there, you can see this drive wheel is still in contact with the ground, even though this wheel is 25mm off the ground, and both rear wheels are firmly attached as well. If the Husqvarna rides over a 25mm wedge, the adjacent wheel is 25mm off the ground. So you can see it becomes quite unstable, where this robot is free to track and follow the undulations and natural curves of your lawn. Bumpers and collision sensors. Now both robots use completely different methods for detecting an obstacle on the lawn. This could be a tree, a piece of garden furniture, or a shed, or anything solid that the robot is going to go up against, touch it, and then change direction. We'll start by looking at the Husqvarna. Now the Husqvarna uses a floating top cover design, so as you can see here, the cover is free to move in any direction. So as the robot drives up against an obstacle, if the obstacle is to the left side of the front of the robot, it will press the cover over to the right, and the robot can interpret that and change direction, turning away from it. If something is hit head on and forces the cover directly backwards, the robot can reverse back, turn around and change direction. This is achieved because the top cover is mounted on 3 plastic ball joints which are spring loaded, which allow this free movement but make the cover always return back to a neutral position. I'll remove this top cover and show you how that works. Okay, so here at the back we've got 2 plastic arms with little ball joints on top. These are sprung loaded and always return to a neutral position. At the front here we've got another one, slightly different. It's got a rubber gate around it, and this one has free movement in any direction, but it also moves up and down, and that's because there's a sensor to detect if the cover gets lifted whilst it's in operation. How the robot tracks the movement of the top cover is there's a Hall effect sensor mounted underneath this part of the chassis, and that is monitoring the movement of the top shell because there's a magnet located just here at the front. So as this cover moves backwards and forwards or side to side, that's directly above a Hall effect sensor in this part of the chassis, and that movement is then interpreted by the software and tells the robot to change direction. This is the same design on all of the Husqvarna robotic mowers. They use that floating cover mounted on these joints to detect the collisions. The L20 actually uses 3 different methods for detecting obstacles on the lawn. The first one is the mechanical bumper at the front of the robot here. This is attached to a stainless steel gimbal which gives the robot that lateral movement I showed you earlier in the video, so it can follow undulations, but it also can move side to side and straight backwards for detecting an obstacle. That stainless steel gimbal has a magnet attached to it, and just like on the Husqvarna, there's a Hall effect sensor which tracks the movement of that magnet, so the robot can interpret a collision with a solid object. An unusual thing which I've not seen on any other robot before is the front wheel axles are actually incorporated into the bumper design, and that's particularly good for detecting low hanging solid obstacles. I'll give you an example. If I take this small piece of wood, that would be way too low to be detected by pretty much any robot on the market that uses a shell. Some of the Ambrogios use a shell design just like the Husqvarna, but they need some clearance on the ground. This design, as the robot drives up to the solid object, the front wheel, and it stalls the front wheel, that will actually move the bumper back and detect it as a bump, so the robot can reverse and change direction. It's quite a nice little innovation I've not seen before. The next method is the motherboard is actually fitted with a solid state accelerometer, just like you'll see in most smartphones. They're used in conjunction with fitness apps to track the speed and movement of a person walking around. This robot has one on board, so it can compare its expected travel speed with its actual speed. So if the robot suddenly finds itself coming to a stop, even if something hasn't activated the bumper, it can use that data to make it reverse back and change direction. Now, the third method it uses for detecting a collision is an algorithm called drive current monitoring. So this robot has an expected range of current of which the rear drive motors are expected to draw, and if that suddenly spikes, as it does when the robot is stalled by hitting a tree or a piece of furniture, it can use that data in conjunction with the accelerometer data to make a decision to change direction or change course. So that's the 3 methods that the Ambrogio use for detecting collisions in the lawn. Now, for the first time in one of my videos, I'm going to open up the chassis on these 2 robots so we can have a look inside and see how they're made. Okay, just disconnect this ribbon cable, and then that's the top cover removed. So you can see here, this is the bottom of the front bumper sensor sort of joystick assembly, and on here you've got the Hall effect sensor board and the magnet. So as this moves from side to side, the magnet moves further away or closer to the Hall effect sensor, and that's what allows the robot to detect the bump. So just lift up the chassis so you can see, again, there's a lot of airspace inside here. I don't know why there's so much empty space, but as you can see, there is, you've got your 2 drive motors here. And inside this height adjustment assembly, you've got the mowing motor, which drives the disc with the blade on it. And then at the back here, you've got the motherboard. And the battery is actually located just here between the 2 drive motors. So we'll remove that in a moment and have a closer look. Okay, now I'm going to open up the L20 and have a look inside. First, remove the wheel caps. over. Okay, that's the top cover removed. Okay, we could begin to have a little look around inside the L20. Starting at the front, this unit here is the GSM and GPS unit. This is the antenna on top with the GPS board underneath. In the centre of the machine here, this is the brushless induction mowing motor. And then just behind it, that's the battery. And then this is the motherboard. And it's split out into two sections. You've got a logic board and then you've got a driver board. It separates the two, but we'll talk about that more a bit later on. So yeah, that's the L20 on the inside. Just show you, it's the Husqvarna side by side, so you can see the layouts. Okay, with both robots having the top removed side by side, a couple of things I want to show you. Both robots have a gasket that allows the top half and the bottom half to seal against weather and water ingress. There's a nice rubber gasket in there to keep out the moisture. The two halves of the Husqvarna are held together with stainless steel self-tapping screws that self-tap straight into the plastic collars you see all the way around the chassis. The Ambrogio is held together with stainless steel machinery thread screws that go into brass inserts. They've just gone the extra mile there, and there's proper threaded brass inserts on the inside cover to pull it together. Just a small detail. Now when you look at the front wheels on the two, one of the things I didn't mention earlier is both of the front wheels, not only are they actively part of the front bumper, they also have drop-off sensors built in. So you can see that bit of movement there. On each side there's actually a drop-off sensor which is reading whether the wheel is on the ground or whether it's dropped in a hole or got off a cliff or something like that. So that's quite a nice feature that it's got those two lift sensors. It also detects when the robot's being picked up, the two front wheels drop and that registers as lifted. On the Husqvarna, the front wheels are completely fixed, there's no movement at all, and they're actually held on, surprisingly, with a zinc Starlock washer. So it's just like a push-on fix. I would have expected that to be a nut or an E-clip or a circlip, but yeah, it's actually just a zinc push-on fix washer. The fixing on the Ambrogio is an E-clip, a stainless steel E-clip. It's very difficult to see. I'll put a photo so you can see, but the shaft is held in with an E-clip. Batteries. Now the battery is an extremely important part of any robotic lawnmower. Sometimes people focus all of their attention on the voltage of the battery as an indication of how powerful the robot's going to be. The higher the voltage, the more powerful. And this is kind of coming from the power tool market, because if we compare a 12 volt drill to a 24 volt drill, the 24 volt drill is going to kill it every time. However, my advice would be to focus mainly on the amp hour rating as the most useful and important factor when making a comparison. Think of the amp hours, or the AH number, as the robot's fuel tank. The bigger the AH number, the bigger the tank capacity. This directly affects the runtime of the robot. The smaller the AH rating, the more charge cycles and trips back to the base station for recharging the robot will have to make. This will affect the wear and tear of the lawn in the lead up to the base station, and the wear and tear of the robot and the base station components. So let's compare the two batteries on these two robots and see how they compare. The Husqvarna 310, 315 and 315X all use the same battery. They operate on an 18 volt system, and this is a 2.1 amp hour lithium-ion battery. All three robots give a run time of between 60 and 70 minutes, and they take about an hour to charge. I have to say, this is the lowest specification battery I've ever seen used on a robotic mower. in nearly 20 years of dealing with them. That's the smallest one I've ever seen. It's a little underwhelming given the cost of this robot is £1,300. For this Husqvarna robot to cover the 1,000 square metres it's rated for, this robot will need to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so there's no free lawn time at all. The robot has to be cutting all of the time. Not ideal if you've got kids and pets. The Ambrogio L20 Elite uses a 26 volt lithium ion battery with a slightly higher 2.5 amp hour capacity. The L20 is also much smaller and lighter and more energy efficient with that capacity, giving a runtime of 120 minutes. This model takes around 60 minutes to charge, so that's double the runtime with the same charge time as the Husqvarna. To maintain a 1,000 square metre lawn with this robot, it will require 5 mowing cycles or 10 hours per day or night, giving you a potential 14 hours free lawn time each day. Let's have a look at the two batteries side by side. So this is the 18 volt battery from the Husqvarna, and this is the 26 volt battery from the Ambrogio. You can see they're similar, but the Ambrogio version is it's a bit fatter and longer. So hopefully that will give you an indication how to compare. Motors. Motors and reduction gears really take the brunt of workload from any robotic lawnmower. They take all of the hammer of the day-to-day operation. So good quality, powerful, well-engineered gears and motors are right at the top of my list of where you want the manufacturers to spend the money well. I'm pleased to say that both manufacturers are utilising brushless induction motor technology, but the sizes and specifications of the motors between the two models are quite different. So I'm now going to remove the motors from both robots so we can take a closer look and compare them. So here we've got the mowing motor and the drive motor from the Ambrogio L20. Now I'm going to remove the drive motor from the Husqvarna. Now I'm going to remove the mowing motor from the Husqvarna. See in here the mowing motor. I've removed the mowing motors from both of these robots and one each of the rear drive motors so we can have a closer look and compare of the components. We'll start with the Husqvarna. Now this is one of the rear drive motor assemblies. This is used on the 310, 315 and 315X robot range. It's a brushless induction motor. This section in grey here, this is the actual motor itself, and that's attached to a planetary gearbox just below it here. The whole thing is held into the chassis with this plastic flange plate by 4 self-tapping screws. The motor itself, in its design, is very common of what you would see in a lot of consumer electronics like printers, kids' toys and things like that. It's crimped together in its design, so it's machine assembled and then crimped. It has a single Molenex connector for the power and speed monitoring. We'll have a look at the Ambrogio. So this one is used on the Ambrogio L20 Deluxe, Elite and Elite S Plus. All three models use the same drive motor. The diameter of the motor, you can see at the back here, is exactly the same size as the Husqvarna. However, what is different is the way in which this motor is assembled. This is a more industrial design motor, and it's held together with screws. It's hand assembled and actually screwed together rather than crimped. You can see around the outside here, the reason it looks much bigger than the one on the Husqvarna is this machined metal tube here is actually a heat sink which draws heat away from the motor and gearbox to help keep it cool during operation. This motor is held into the chassis with a galvanised steel plate just here, and it's held in with 4 machinery thread screws. The connection to this motor is separated into the high current and power on this connector here, and then speed monitoring of the odometer sensor with a separate cable here. So now we'll compare the mowing motors. We'll start with the Husqvarna. The Husqvarna mowing motor are supplied inside this plastic box. It's not removable from this plastic box because the blade boss is pressed onto the motor shaft after it's been assembled, and this forms part of the height adjustment assembly. So we can see in here you've got a motor. It's the same type of motor as the one at the rear, slightly larger. It's a crimped together design, again brushless induction motor with a single Molenex connector for the power and speed monitoring. Looks good quality, nothing wrong with it. You can see the blade boss there where the blade assembly attaches on. So when you need to replace that, you buy the whole unit and it just slots in with the box already attached. If we have a look at the motor used on the Ambrogio, this is a much larger brushless induction motor, and you'll see that the design and type is totally different. This type of motor is more commonly used on industrial applications as well. You find these on a lot of industrial equipment or healthcare equipment. The reason Ambrogio tend to use this type of motor is Zucchetti, which actually own the brand Ambrogio Robot. Their core business is manufacturing industrial automation products for factories and production lines, and they also make some healthcare equipment. So a lot of that engineering and part sourcing comes from the same pedigree. Again, you've got separate connectors, you've got very, very thick high current cables connected to this red plug here, and then the smaller wires are used for monitoring the odometer sensor for the speed of the motor. Again, this is screwed together, designed rather than crimped. And if we compare the diameter of the mowing motor from the Husqvarna and from the Ambrogio, you can see it's a much more substantial unit. If we compare the blade bosses where the blade attaches as well, on the Ambrogio there it's a large piece of machined aluminium forms the blade boss. Again, it's aluminium on the Husqvarna, but it's a much smaller unit. They use much lighter blades, to be fair, so a lighter blade boss is appropriate, but you can see the difference there in the design of the two motors. PCBs. Now I've removed both of the motherboards from the robots so we can get a closer look at some of the engineering differences. We'll start with a Husqvarna. This is the same board used in the 310, 315 and 315X. It's a single board design. It incorporates the logic systems and low voltage side with the higher current, charging and motor control circuitry in one PCB. This is by far the most common design that we see in robotic lawnmowers and kind of what you would expect. It's nice to see that they've used polymer solid electrolytic capacitors. This should ensure a long service life. The CPU located here is an ARM Cortex M3 120 MHz 32-bit processor with 3 digital analog converters. It's got plenty of power for this application and is well spec'd. The motor drivers are located just along here. They're MOSFET motor drivers. I can't actually make out the numbers on them. They're very, very small, but they're kind of what you'd expect given the relatively small motors used in the Husqvarna robot there. The connectors for the motors are these Molenex style connectors just here. You've got 2 drive motors either side, and in the middle is the mowing motor. The board also incorporates 2 wire sensors which form the rear wire sensors for the robot, and it has a USB connector for dealer servicing. So when your robot goes into the service centre, it can be plugged into a laptop and they can do diagnostics or update the software and things like that. Has a ribbon cable connector just there for connecting to the user interface, and a couple of accessory connectors there for some of the models that have GPS. On the back of the board there is a little siren built in, so that's the board from the Husqvarna. The L20 uses a scaled-back version of the company's AM4000 motherboard. It's actually the same motherboard that they use in the high-end Ambrogio robots like the 4.0, the L250 and the 350, just without the colour touchscreen driver and some of the additional heatsinks. This PCB is built in a totally different way, and it's in a different class to all of the robotic lawnmowers on the market. The design here is more like what you would see in an industrial application or a piece of medical equipment. This is most probably because Zucchetti, the company that own Ambrogio Robot, also build industrial automation systems for factories, and they also make medical equipment for hospitals, so it's just the way that they engineer things. The motherboard itself is split into two different layers. The top layer handles all the high current loads, like charging the battery and driving and controlling the motors. The lower section here has got the logic circuits on and CPU. This allows the hotter, more current hungry components on the top board there to keep cool by allowing air to circulate around the board itself, and it keeps it away from the sensitive electronics. If we have a look a bit closer at the board here, you can see a row of 18 Optimos Infineon MOSFET drivers. Now this is what controls the motors. There's actually 18 of them here, and this is because this setup is designed to run much larger motors in some of the higher powered robots. So when it's installed in an L20, it's really not working very hard at all. The connections to those motors take place through these connectors here. These connectors are actually rated at 30 amps, which is way more substantial than you would expect to see in this type of application, especially given that the battery is only rated at 2.5 amps. So these are really over the top in terms of their quality for this type of product. That same 2.5 amp hour battery is switched on and off by two automotive style 20 amp relays. Again, loads of redundancy there, it's way over what's required. And there's also some automotive style blade fuses for protection and to allow a bit of serviceability on the board. You don't actually see fuses very often on consumer electronics these days, or certainly not replaceable ones. And if we separate the top section here from the bottom, this lower PCB is the logic board or brain of the robot. This is where all of the calculations in the software are made. The processor used on this board is an ARM Cortex M3 144 MHz 32-bit processor with 8 analog digital converters. It's actually a slightly higher specification of the same CPU family used on the Husqvarna. Again, this is way over what's required to run this type of robot, but it allows for future developments and software upgrades for many years to come. This is also the same processor used in the Ambrogio L450, a commercial mowing robot which can cover 20,000 square meters. So you can see it's not really working very hard when it's used in a much smaller robot like this. The board also features polymer solid electrolytic capacitors for long service life, and it has a black box recorder in the form of an SD card, a micro SD card here, and the data and statistics from every operation that the robot makes are stored on here. Also, versions that are fitted with a GPS module, like the Elite and Elite S Plus, the satellite dynamic map is stored on that SD card, and it allows the robot to keep a track on where it's been in the garden. Some of the other features on this board is it contains a Bluetooth 4 chipset here, and this is used for connecting with the app, but it's also used by service centres to connect to the robot and update the software and have a look at the data on the black box recorder. So there's no need for a USB connector on this board. The board also features an accelerometer and a solid state gyro compass built into the board there. So that gives you an idea of how the board differs. On the back there's some more surface mount components. Okay. Base stations. Both robots come supplied complete with their own charging stations. We'll start by looking at the Ambrogio. This is the base station that's supplied with the L20 Deluxe, Elite and the Elite S Plus. It's a super compact and minimalistic design, as you can see here. It consists of two parts, the base plate, which is secured to the ground, and the charging station head, which has two charging plates here. These are stainless steel charging contacts, and underneath it, it's got a connection for the perimeter wire. Now, the installation for the Ambrogio is very, very straightforward. There's a single perimeter wire which is pegged around the perimeter of the lawn, and it connects to these two tabs here. There's a centre channel cut down the centre of the base plate to help you locate the wire nice and straight down the centre, and it connects into one side. And as the wire goes around the outside of the lawn and comes back behind the base station, it connects to the other tab just here. The low voltage power supply cable that's supplied with the robot is 10 meters long. It's a super thick, high quality, durable cable, which is good to protect it from strimming, or if you're doing some digging in a garden edge border, you don't want to be accidentally cutting through the cable. So that's a nice, strong, durable cable there. And it's got a chunky connector which connects into the IP rated power supply. Both robots actually utilise a very, very similar power supply. It looks like this. Onto the Husqvarna. This base station is supplied with the 310, the 315 and the 315X. As you can see, it's a much larger base plate. If you compare the size of the two, you can see it's considerably bigger. It consists of a charging station head with the signal generator inside and the charging contacts underneath. So just under here you can see there's two copper charging contacts which the robot makes contact with. On the back of the base station head you've got your connections for your perimeter wire and for a guide wire. So on this robot you have a perimeter wire which goes around the outside of the lawn, and you also have a wire which goes, from the centre of the base station into the middle of the lawn that the robot looks for when it needs to charge its battery, and it drives back to the base station following that wire. It comes supplied with low voltage charging station cable, you can see here. It's considerably thinner than the Ambrogio. You can see it's a 2mm sort of almost like speaker wire or doorbell wire style power cable with two nice waterproof connectors, one on each end, and that connects to a power supply just like the one on the Ambrogio there. So yeah, but you can see there's quite a difference in the thickness of the two types of cable here. This one's 8mm thick, this one's 2mm thick. So you can just see they might be a little bit more vulnerable if you weren't careful whilst strimming around the outside edge of your lawn. So yeah, that's the two different charging station designs. You see, I'll just hold them up again so you can really see the difference in the size that they'll take up. If you've made it right to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. I know it's been quite nerdy and in-depth comparing all the different aspects of the two robots, but thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the comparisons I've made. Just to remind you that both robots are from good quality manufacturers with good service backup. We're not really comparing a bad robot with a good robot. They're both good robots with proper dealer support behind them. It's not like you're buying an unbranded product with no after-sales service. Both of these come from a good pedigree, so it's really just showing you what you actually get for your money. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me or any of the team at mowermagic.co.uk. For more information on the Husqvarna machine, you can go to husqvarna.com. For more information on the Ambrogio, go to ambrogio.co.uk. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you for watching.